Bulgaria's Prime Minister Resignation resigned after tens of thousands of Bulgarians joined protests over allegations of widespread corruption.
Ukraine reportedly struck another oil tanker from Russia's so-called shadow fleet in the Black Sea on Wednesday.
U.S. forces have seized an oil tanker off the coast of Venezuela, prompting swift condemnation from Nicolas Maduro's government, which called it an act of international piracy.
Bulgaria's Prime Minister Resignation resigned on Thursday after tens of thousands of Bulgarians joined protests across the country demanding that the government step down over allegations of widespread corruption. Media estimates based on drone footage put the number of demonstrators at over 100,000, with some reports claiming up to 150,000 people had gathered in the Bulgarian capital. Students from Sofia's universities joined the rallies, which organizers said exceeded last week's protests that drew more than 50,000 people. Further protests took place in more than 25 major cities across Bulgaria, including Plovdiv, Varna, Veliko Tarnovo, and Razgrad. Bulgarians abroad also gathered on Wednesday with demonstrations held in Brussels, London, Berlin, Vienna, Zurich, and New York. The demands included the resignation of the government and better living and working conditions.
Ukraine reportedly struck another oil tanker from Russia's so-called shadow fleet in the Black Sea on Wednesday. Authorities said naval drones caused critical damage. Russian officials claimed that 3 Ukrainian sea drones attacked the tanker while a British aircraft was allegedly operating in the western part of the Black Sea during the attack. Ukraine's security service said the oil tanker was sailing under the flag of Comoros and was traveling at a fast speed with its transponder turned off. The vessel was traveling inside Ukraine's exclusive economic zone off the coast of Crimea and was heading towards a port terminal in Russia. The EU, the UK, Canada, Australia and Switzerland have previously sanctioned the tanker for its role in transporting Russian oil and for operating with its vessel identification systems disabled. Russia uses a shadow fleet which consists of old tankers often travelling under flags of countries like Comoros and Panama to circumvent Western sanctions.
Thank you so much.
Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić appeared to suggest he had received a message from Moscow. He was caught saying so on a hot mic during a visit to Brussels, in which he held talks with top European Union officials. Vučić was walking next to European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen ahead of taking a family picture. The two were accompanied by EU Council President Antonio Costa.
I got a message from Moscow now.
Oh, let's wait till we are, my friend.
It is not yet clear what message from Moscow Vučić was referring to. However, the Serbian president is one of the few European leaders who maintains a communications channel with the Kremlin, as the EU broke off diplomatic ties with Russia after its invasion of Ukraine in 2022. Vučić was in Brussels on Wednesday for a Serbia-EU bilateral meeting to discuss, among other themes, the country's EU membership bid.
U.S. President Donald Trump announced Wednesday that U.S. naval forces had seized an oil tanker off the coast of Venezuela as tensions mount with the government of President Nicolas Maduro. The seizure was led by the U.S. Coast Guard and supported by the Navy. Trump did not offer additional details but said the U.S. would keep the oil aboard the tanker.
As you probably know, we've just seized a tanker on the coast of Venezuela, a large tanker, very large. Largest one ever seized, actually. And other things are happening.
Venezuela's government in a statement condemned the seizure as a blatant theft and an act of international piracy. Using U.S. forces to take control of a merchant ship is incredibly unusual and marks the Trump administration's latest push to increase pressure on Maduro. The seizure also follows a series of deadly strikes on alleged drug smuggling boats in the Caribbean Sea and Eastern Pacific Ocean, a campaign that is facing growing scrutiny from U.S. Congress.
Ukraine does not need lessons about democracy, Nobel Peace Prize winner Alexandra Medvedchuk told Euronews in an interview on the Europe Today program. Medvedchuk was referring to claims by US President Donald Trump that authorities in Kiev are using the war as an excuse to avoid an election.
Ukraine don't have a need to be lectured about election. In 2004, millions of people in Ukraine organized Orange Revolution when our electoral right was stolen. So we value elections. The question is, do we have security to organize election? This is the main question.
Ukraine was slated to hold elections in 2024, but could not go ahead after martial law was put in place following Russia's invasion in 2022. Ukrainian authorities have repeatedly said they support a new ballot, but point to the logistical complications of doing so while the country is being at war. Nonetheless, the Trump administration is pushing for a prompt Ukrainian election to be written into any peace deal.
A new World Inequality report warns that fewer than 60,000 of the world's richest people own more wealth than half of the entire world put together. The report highlights extreme gaps in income and wealth, which translate into unequal distribution of political power. A global elite amounting to 0.001% of the population is 3 times wealthier than the bottom 50%. At the same time, the top tier contributes disproportionately little to public finances. Middle-class workers on a high professional salary, such as doctors, teachers, and engineers, pay a higher share of their income in tax than a billionaire whose wealth is based on offshore structures or capital gains. Global wealth inequality also leads to an unequal contribution to climate change. The report shows that a person in the global top 1% income group emits on average around 75 times more carbon per year than someone in the bottom 50%. At the global scale, the top 1% accounts for 41% of all greenhouse gas emissions under ownership-based accounting. The report argues that the international monetary and financial system is structurally set up to favor rich countries and drain resources from poorer ones. Crucially, the report argues this pattern is not the natural outcome of free markets, but the result of political and institutional design. The report concludes that the current global system reproduces inequality between countries in a way that echoes, in a subtler form, older patterns of colonial extraction. The daughter of Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado accepted the Nobel Peace Prize on her mother's behalf on Wednesday, after officials said Machado would not attend the ceremony. Machado has been in hiding and has not been seen in public since January, when she was briefly detained after joining supporters in a protest in the Venezuelan capital, Caracas.
She wants to live in a free Venezuela, and she will never give up on that purpose. That is why we all know, and I know, that she will be back in Venezuela.
The Nobel Institute awarded Machado the prize for her struggle to achieve a democratic transition in Venezuela. She won an opposition primary election and intended to challenge President Nicolás Maduro in last year's presidential election, but the government barred her from running for office. The lead-up to the election saw widespread repression, including disqualifications, arrests, and human rights violations. UN human rights officials and many independent rights groups have expressed concerns about the situation in Venezuela and called for Maduro to be held accountable for the crackdown on dissent.
Iceland is the latest country to announce it will not be taking part in the Eurovision Song Contest next year, after the organizer EBU said Israel could participate. Iceland's public broadcaster said the decision to allow Israel to join caused disunity. Local media said a crowd had gathered outside the broadcaster's headquarters to show their support. The announcement comes a week after 4 other countries announced they were pulling out of the contest for the same reason. Spain, the Netherlands, Slovenia, and Ireland all said they wouldn't participate, citing Israel's offensive in Gaza as a reason for the boycott.
Well, we would like to see other countries and other broadcasters, such as the BBC, follow the lead of RTE, follow the lead of the Spanish broadcaster, because we cannot understand how European broadcasters would continue to support the state of Israel being in the Eurovision, given that Israel targets and kills broadcasters, journalists and camera crews, and continues to refuse to allow EBU members send their own staff in.
The EBU has previously said it strives to remain politically neutral. However, in 2022 it banned Russia from competing following its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Archaeologists in the United Kingdom have uncovered the earliest evidence of humans making fire at 400,000 years old. It has long been known that ancient humans used naturally occurring fire more than 1 million years ago, but it has remained unclear when exactly humans learned to create and control fire themselves.
So we have this evidence for a fireplace. We have next to it archaeology, artefacts made by Neanderthals. But what really makes this site extraordinary is the discovery of these two little fragments, and this is just a tiny little fragment of iron pyrite. So this is a mineral that can be used for striking. You strike it with flint and it creates sparks. So it's part of a fire lighting kit. So this is evidence that not only were Neanderthals using fire at this site, but they were also making the fire using flint and pyrite.
The archaeological team spent 4 years analysing the materials to rule out natural wildfires. Tests showed temperatures above 700 degrees Celsius and repeated burning in the same location, indicating a hearth was used multiple times. Other fossils of the same age were found in Britain and Spain, exhibiting traits linked to Neanderthals.